My name is Sergeant Elias Vance, and for 20 years, the rhythmic beat of a soldier's life was the only cadence I truly knew. From the moment I first laced up my standard-issue boots, still a boy trying to fill a man's shadow, the Army became my world, my family, my undeniable purpose. I wasn't one for deep philosophical musings. My faith, such as it was a sturdy, unquestioned thing, like the Kevlar vest I strapped on before every patrol. It was there, a background hum of belief in something greater, something that watched over us as we walked through the valley of the shadow. I prayed, yes, mostly quick, fervent pleas in the heat of battle or quiet words of gratitude when we returned, one more mission etched into the tally of our survival. But the intricacies of doctrine, the deep dives into scripture, those were for chaplains and men with softer hands. My hands were calloused, trained to hold a rifle, to build, to break, to protect. My understanding of good and evil was stark, defined by the lines drawn in the sand, the orders given, the enemy in my sights. There was a clarity in that, a brutal simplicity that the complexities of civilian life seemed to lack. We were the good guys, fighting for freedom, for those who couldn't fight for themselves. That was the narrative, and I clung to it, because to question it too deeply was to invite a kind of chaos I wasn't equipped to handle. The camaraderie was real, a bond forged in shared hardship and the constant, unspoken understanding that any one of us might not make it back. We were brothers, sisters, a tribe unto ourselves, and my loyalty to my unit, to the men and women beside me, was absolute. That, in many ways, was my most tangible faith. Yet, in the quiet hours, when the generators hummed and the desert night stretched out, vast and indifferent, sometimes a sliver of unease would find its way in. Looking up at a sky dusted with more stars than I'd ever imagined, I'd feel a smallness, a sense of being a tiny cog in a vast, incomprehensible machine. What was it all truly for? Were our sacrifices, the lives lost, the innocence shattered, truly tipping the scales towards some greater good? Or were we just perpetuating a cycle as old as humanity itself? I'd push those thoughts away, labeling them as fatigue, as the kind of introspection that had no place on the front lines. My job was to be focused, to be strong, to lead. Doubt was a weakness, a crack in the armor, and I couldn't afford it. I believed in duty, in honor, in the mission. That was my trinity, and it had served me well, or so I thought. The upcoming deployment was touted as a critical one, a push into a region that had long been a hornet's nest. The briefings were intense, the intelligence grim. We knew it would be tough, but that was our bread and butter. We trained relentlessly, our bodies and minds honed for the task ahead. I remember checking my gear one last time, the familiar weight of it, the scent of oil and sweat and something uniquely military. I looked at the faces of my squad, young men, most of them, their eyes a mixture of apprehension and that youthful bravado that always pricked at my conscience. I was responsible for them, for bringing them home. That weight was heavier than any rucksack. My faith, then, was a pragmatic thing, a belief that if we did our jobs, if we stayed alert, if we looked out for each other, we'd have a fighting chance. The divine, in my understanding, helped those who helped themselves. It was a distant commander, perhaps overseeing the grand strategy, but the tactical decisions, the life and death choices on the ground, those felt very much like they were ours alone. Little did I know that my entire understanding of faith, of life, of the very fabric of reality, was about to be ripped apart and rewoven in a way I could never have conceived, not in my wildest dreams or my darkest nightmares. The sense of purpose was ingrained, a shield against the creeping existential dread that could sometimes whisper at the edges of a soldier's mind during the long, empty stretches between moments of terror. We were a line, a thin barrier against chaos, and that belief, more than any abstract theological concept, was what got me through the door of the transport plane time and time again. This particular region was notorious, a place where empires had historically come to grief, where loyalties shifted like the desert sands, and where the enemy was often indistinguishable from the civilian population. The pre-mission anxiety was a familiar companion, a cold knot in the stomach that I'd learned to manage, to channel into heightened awareness. My prayers, such as they were, became more frequent in the days leading up to boots on the ground. Short, sharp requests for protection for my team, for clarity in the fog of war, for the strength to do what needed to be done. I didn't ask for understanding of the grander plan. I asked for the fortitude to execute my small part of it. The night before we moved out, I found myself staring at a worn photograph of my wife and kids, their smiles a beacon from a world away, a world of safety and normality that felt increasingly alien. This was why I fought, I told myself, to protect that, to ensure that the darkness we faced out here never reached their doorstep. It was a comforting thought, a righteous justification that helped to silence the deeper, more troubling questions about the efficacy and the ultimate cost of our endeavors. But even that justification felt thinner than it used to. The lines were blurrier now, the victories less clear-cut, the sacrifices heavier with each passing year, with each new face in the casualty reports. I was a good soldier, a good leader, I told myself. I followed orders, I took care of my men, I believed in the flag on my shoulder. If that wasn't enough, what was? The desert air was already beginning to shimmer with heat as our convoy rumbled out of the forward operating base, a line of armored vehicles kicking up a plume of fine, talcum-like dust that hung in the air like a persistent ghost. The tension inside our vehicle was palpable, a tight coil of anticipation and unspoken fears. We'd been over the mission parameters a dozen times: secure a small, contested village, root out insurgent elements, and establish a foothold for follow-on forces. Standard operating procedure, if anything in a war zone could ever be called standard. I ran a final check on my communications gear, my eyes scanning the faces of my team. Corporal Miller, barely out of his teens, was nervously tapping his rifle stock. Private Chen, usually quick with a joke, stared blankly out of the reinforced window. I gave them what I hoped was a reassuring nod. Stay sharp. Listen to your training. Watch each other's backs. We do this right. We all go home. The words felt hollow even to me, a rote recitation of the soldier's creed. The truth was, there were no guarantees in this game, only probabilities. And sometimes, the probabilities were stacked against you. As we approached the village, the familiar landscape of mud brick compounds and sparse, sun-baked vegetation unfolded. It looked deceptively peaceful, but we knew better. This was an area where the enemy had proven to be deeply entrenched, masters of asymmetric warfare. The first sign of trouble came not as a bang, but as a chilling silence. The usual sounds of village life, distant voices, the braying of a donkey, the chatter of children, were absent. It was an unnatural quiet that set every nerve on edge. Eyes open, I radioed. Something's not right. We dismounted, fanning out our weapons at the ready, the oppressive heat already causing sweat to slick our palms. The village streets were narrow, winding, offering 1,000 potential ambush points. Each doorway, each rooftop, each darkened alleyway felt like a threat. We moved slowly, methodically, clearing compounds one by one. The silence persisted, broken only by our own footsteps and the crackle of the comms. It was a nerve-wracking game of cat and mouse. But who was the cat and who was the mouse was yet to be determined. Then, all hell broke loose. A sudden, deafening explosion ripped through the air to our left, sending a shockwave that threw us off our feet. Dust and debris rained down, the acrid smell of explosives stinging my nostrils. Before the ringing in my ears had even subsided, the distinctive crackle of automatic rifle fire erupted from multiple directions. Contact front, contact right. The shouts were immediate, disciplined, as my team reacted, seeking cover, returning fire. The quiet village had transformed into a kill zone. Adrenaline surged through me, a cold, clear rush that sharpened my senses. Training took over. I barked orders, coordinating fire, trying to identify the enemy positions. They were well hidden, using the labyrinthine layout of the village to their advantage. Bullets whizzed past, thudding into the mud walls around us, kicking up angry spurts of dust. We were pinned down, taking heavy fire. Miller went down, a cry of pain cut short. "Man down!" Chen yelled, dragging Miller behind the meager cover of a low wall. I laid down, suppressing fire, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. We had to move, to break out of this kill box. I saw a narrow alleyway that might offer a flanking route. "Chen, cover me. Rest of you, on my signal." We moved to that alley. I could feel the heat of the sun, the grit in my teeth, the sting of sweat in my eyes. The world had shrunk to this one horrifying, intense moment. I took a deep breath, a silent prayer on my lips. Not for myself, but for my men. Go, go, go. I roared, breaking cover, sprinting towards the alley, bullets snapping around me like angry insects. I felt a searing pain in my leg, stumbled, but kept going. The alley. We had to make it to the alley. Just as I reached the entrance, a figure emerged from a doorway, weapon raised. There was no time to think, only to react. I brought my rifle up, but he was faster. A blinding flash, a sensation like being hit by a freight train in the chest, and then nothing. The world dissolved into an unbearable, crushing pressure, and then a profound, infinite blackness. There was no sound, no light, no pain, just a complete and utter void. My last conscious thought was not of the mission, or the enemy, or even my own life, but a fleeting, desperate image of my men, their faces strained, caught in the crossfire. And then I was gone, or so it seemed, tumbling into an abyss from which I was certain there would be no return, leaving behind the cacophony of battle for a silence that was absolute and terrifyingly final. The impact was a physical obliteration of sense, a concussive force that felt like it had torn reality itself asunder. One moment, I was a being of flesh and blood, adrenaline and fear. The next, a disembodied point of consciousness, hurled into an infinite, soundless, sightless expanse. The blackness wasn't merely the absence of light. It felt like a substance, heavy and suffocating, pressing in from all directions. There was no up or down, no past or future, only this eternal, unchanging now, of pure nothingness. My identity, Elias Vance, sergeant, leader of men, husband, father, all of it felt stripped away, irrelevant in this vast, indifferent void. The very concept of I began to fray at the edges. What was I, without a body, without thoughts, without the familiar anchors of sensory perception? It was a state of terrifying dissolution. I have no idea how long I existed in that state. Time as I knew it had ceased to have meaning. It could have been a microsecond or a millennium. But then, gradually, almost imperceptibly, a shift occurred. It wasn't a return of my physical senses, but a dawning awareness, a spark of self-recognition in the midst of the void. I was. That simple, undeniable truth began to reassert itself. With this nascent self-awareness came a faint sensation, not of sight, but of perception. I was above, looking down upon the chaotic scene I had just departed. The alleyway, the dust, the sprawled form in the dirt, my form. There it lay, an inert puppet with its strings cut, a dark stain blossoming on its chest. The sounds of the firefight reached me, but they were strangely muted, as if coming from a great distance, or through a thick wall of glass. I saw my men, their faces contorted with the effort of combat, their movements urgent, desperate. Chen was trying to rally them, even as he returned fire. Medics were already scrambling towards my fallen body, their movements hampered by the ongoing exchange of fire. A wave of profound detachment washed over me. There was no pain, no fear, only a strange, almost clinical observation. That was me, down there. That life, with its struggles, its small joys, its brutal end, was over. I should have felt grief, or terror, or perhaps anger at the abruptness of it all. But instead, there was only this vast, inexplicable calm. As I hovered, an unseen observer, the atmosphere around the immediate vicinity of my body began to change. It wasn't a physical change, but something else, something spiritual. The desert air, already thick with the metallic tang of cordite and fear, grew colder, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. And then I saw them. At first, they were just flickers in the periphery, like heat haze distorting the edges of reality. But as I focused, they coalesced into more definite, though still insubstantial forms. Shadowy figures, dark and amorphous, seemed to rise from the very ground, from the darkened doorways and the rubble-strewn corners of the village. They were not human, nor were they animal. They were entities of pure shadow, their forms constantly shifting, writhing, as if composed of living darkness. They moved with a silent, predatory grace, drawn towards the scene of violence, towards the spot where my lifeblood was seeping into the thirsty earth. An instinctual dread, far deeper and more primal than any fear I had known in combat, gripped me. These were not enemies I could shoot, not threats I could neutralize with training and firepower. They radiated a malevolence, a spiritual hunger that was palpable even in my disembodied state. Their presence felt like a physical weight, an oppressive psychic pressure that sought to crush my nascent spiritual awareness. They whispered, not in words I could understand, but in a sibilant chorus of despair and negation that clawed at the edges of my consciousness. They seemed to be pulling at me, not with physical hands, but with tendrils of darkness, trying to draw me down into their shadowy domain. I recoiled, or tried to, but I was incorporeal, helpless. Panic, cold and sharp, began to pierce through my detached calm. Was this hell? Was this the fate of a soldier, to be consumed by the very darkness we fought against? Just as the closest of these shadowy forms extended a tendril of what looked like solidified night towards me, just as despair threatened to engulf me completely, a light appeared. It began as a tiny, almost insignificant spark in the vast spiritual distance, a single point of brilliance in the oppressive gloom. But it grew, oh, how it grew, expanding with a gentle, irresistible power, pushing back the shadows, dispelling the cold. The shadowy entities recoiled, hissing and dissolving at its touch, their dark forms unable to bear its purity. The light was not the harsh, unforgiving glare of the desert sun, nor the artificial illumination of our technology. This was a light that was alive, that pulsed with an unimaginable warmth, a light that felt like pure, unconditional love. It was a sanctuary, a beacon, a promise of release from the encroaching darkness, an overwhelming sense of relief, so profound it felt like a physical release, washed through me. The fear vanished, replaced by an irresistible yearning, a deep, soul-felt pull towards this magnificent, welcoming radiance. The chaotic scene below, my body, the retreating shadows, all began to fade into insignificance as I was drawn, gently but inexorably, towards the heart of this glorious, beckoning light. It was a journey not through space, but through dimensions of being, towards a reality I had never dreamed existed. The light was all-encompassing, a boundless ocean of warmth and serenity. As I was drawn deeper into its embrace, the last vestiges of the earthly realm, the sounds of combat, the sight of my fallen form, receded like a distant dream. There was no sense of travel, no perception of distance covered, only a continuous immersion into this radiant presence. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon. I could feel it, as if the light itself was made of pure, unconditional love, seeping into the very core of my being, healing wounds I hadn't even known I carried. The peace was absolute, a stillness so profound that it quieted every fear, every question, every lingering echo of the turmoil I had left behind. Within this incredible luminosity, a distinct form began to coalesce, or rather, to emerge from the light, as if it were its source and its most perfect expression. It was a figure, humanoid in shape, yet radiating a majesty and a gentle power that transcended any human description. His features were not sharp or easily defined, as if they were composed of the light itself, yet they conveyed an intelligence, a wisdom, and a compassion that were utterly overwhelming. His eyes, if they could be called such, seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, and as they met my awareness, I felt seen, truly seen, not just my actions or my exterior, but the deepest, most hidden parts of my soul. And in that gaze, there was no judgment, no condemnation, only an infinite, unwavering love that was more potent and more real than anything I had ever experienced. I had no doubt, not a flicker of uncertainty, about who stood before me. The name resonated in my spirit, without a word being spoken. It was Jesus, the Christ, the one whom I had prayed to in hurried battlefield whispers, the one whose teachings I had known in a distant, intellectual way, but whom I had never, ever imagined meeting like this, in this way. Ah, so profound, it was almost unbearable, washed over me. I felt an instinctive urge to bow, to prostrate myself, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming sense of reverence and unworthiness in the face of such purity and love. Elias, his voice was not a sound that vibrated through the air, for there was no air, no ears to hear in the conventional sense. It was a direct communication, a knowing that bloomed within my consciousness, clearer and more resonant than any spoken word. It was gentle, yet it carried an authority that was absolute. The sound of my own name, spoken by him, felt like a benediction, a confirmation of my very existence, washing away any remaining sense of dissolution. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, a thought, the experience shifted. The light around us seemed to become a canvas, and upon it, my life began to unfold. It wasn't like watching a movie on a screen. It was as if I was immersed within the memories, reliving them with an added dimension of complete understanding, seeing not only my actions but the intricate web of motivations, emotions, and consequences that surrounded them. Every moment, from my earliest childhood memories, the scraped knees, the innocent laughter, the first stirrings of conscience, to my final fatal charge into that dusty alleyway, was replayed. I saw myself as a child, shaped by the love and imperfections of my upbringing. I witnessed the restless energy of youth, the desire for belonging and purpose that led me to the structured life of the military. The years in the Army unspooled, the grueling physical and mental conditioning of basic training, the forging of unbreakable bonds with my comrades in the shared crucible of hardship, the deployments to forgotten corners of the world, the fleeting moments of camaraderie interspersed with the stark, brutal realities of combat. I saw the instances where I had acted with courage, not the theatrical bravery of movies, but the quiet, gut-wrenching courage it takes to face death and to lead others into danger, to protect the vulnerable, to uphold a sense of duty even when every instinct screamed for self-preservation. There were moments of unexpected compassion, a shared cigarette with a frightened local, a kind word to a terrified child caught in the crossfire. Small acts of humanity that shone brightly in the grim tapestry of war. These moments brought a surprising warmth, a recognition that even in the harshest environments, the divine spark could flicker. But the life review was unsparingly honest, a mirror reflecting the totality of my being. It also showed me the other side, the moments I was not proud of, the times when fear, anger, or the dehumanizing pressures of conflict had led me to act with less than my highest self. I saw my impatience, my harsh judgments, the times I had allowed the coarse language and hardened attitudes of my profession to obscure my better nature. I witnessed the opportunities for greater kindness or understanding that I had let pass by, the moments where I had chosen expediency over principle, or where the necessity of the mission had led me to actions that, viewed from this transcendent perspective, caused a deep, aching regret. My faith, as I had practiced it, was laid bare in its superficiality. My prayers, often desperate pleas for safety or success, lacked the depth of true communion. My understanding of his teachings was revealed as simplistic, a set of convenient moral guidelines, rather than a transformative, living truth. I had compartmentalized my belief, keeping it separate from the daily realities of my soldiering life, rather than allowing it to permeate and sanctify every thought, word, and deed. The focus of this review was not on condemnation. There was no accusatory finger, no tallying of sins for punishment. Instead, it was an illumination, a profound lesson in cause and effect, in the intricate interconnectedness of all actions and their consequences. The central divine figure, Jesus, remained present throughout this panoramic reliving. His love and unwavering, unconditional constant, even as I witnessed my own failings and shortcomings. It was like being shown a complete spiritual inventory, not for the purpose of judgment, but for the sake of profound, transformative understanding. The review didn't just show my actions. It allowed me to experience the impact of those actions on others. I felt the fear I had instilled in an enemy combatant, the brief flicker of hope I had ignited in a desperate civilian, the comfort my presence had brought to a wounded comrade, the pain my harsh words had caused a subordinate. It was an overwhelming immersion in the web of human relationship, a direct experience of the truth that we are all connected, that what we do to others, we ultimately do to ourselves. And through it all, His loving presence was there, a silent, compassionate witness, allowing me to see myself as I truly was, in the pure, unfiltered, and ultimately merciful light of His truth. The life review continued, peeling back layers of self-deception and ingrained habit, delving deeper not just into my actions but into the very fabric of my beliefs and the true state of my soul. It was an unsparing yet profoundly compassionate examination, like a divine surgeon carefully excising all that was not aligned with love and truth. I saw myself in moments of moral compromise, times when the immense pressures of war and the demands of the mission had led me to blur lines I once thought inviolable. These were not necessarily acts of outright, premeditated evil, but rather instances of looking the other way, when confronted with questionable actions by others, of choosing the expedient path that ensured mission success or personal safety over the more difficult, righteous one. I witnessed the subtle ways the brutalizing environment of constant conflict had chipped away at my core humanity, hardening my heart, making me cynical, and at times dangerously detached from the suffering around me. The review highlighted my interactions with those we had labeled the enemy. I saw their faces not as the monstrous caricatures often painted in times of war, but as individuals, young men, old men, fathers, sons, caught in the same terrible machinery of conflict as I was, driven by their own complex webs of beliefs, fears, loyalties, and indoctrination. From this new elevated vantage point, the stark us versus them mentality that had been so necessary for psychological survival on the battlefield dissolved into a profound and sorrowful understanding of shared human fallibility and the tragic waste of human potential inherent in all warfare. His presence beside me was a constant source of unutterable love, yet this love did not shield me from the acute pain of these realizations. It was a purifying pain, born not of condemnation from him, but of my own dawning, clear-sighted understanding of where I had fallen short of the divine potential within me. He was showing me the unvarnished truth of my heart, the hidden places where fear had masqueraded as prudence, where pride had presented itself as duty, or where a hardened spirit had eclipsed the innate capacity for greater love and compassion. Then the focus of the life review shifted subtly yet significantly to my spiritual life, or more accurately, the profound lack thereof. I saw the countless missed opportunities for deeper connection with him, for genuine spiritual seeking. My prayers, as I had begun to realize with growing dismay, were almost entirely perfunctory, a soldier's habitual appeal for divine intervention in moments of dire straits, rather than a heartfelt yearning for his presence, his wisdom, or his guidance in the everyday conduct of my life. The religious rituals I had occasionally participated in, a hurried sign of the cross, a muttered prayer before a dangerous operation, felt like empty, hollow gestures now. performed more out of superstition or a vague sense of duty than from any genuine, burning devotion or understanding. The central divine figure, Jesus, then began to impart specific revelations, not through didactic pronouncements, but through a direct infusion of understanding that bypassed my limited human intellect and resonated straight within my soul. He showed me the true nature of faith, not as an intellectual assent to a set of doctrines or a tribal affiliation with a particular religious group, but as a living, breathing, dynamic relationship with Him, a continuous turning of the heart towards infinite love, eternal truth, and boundless compassion. He revealed with crystal clarity that His primary concern was not with my military victories, my rank, my medals, or even my strict adherence to a specific religious code, but with the fundamental condition of my soul, with the quantum of love I had managed to cultivate and genuinely share with others during my earthly sojourn. Elias. His communication was gentle but carried an undeniable and transformative weight. The uniform you wore with such pride, the battles you fought with such courage, these were the specific circumstances and trials of your earthly life. They provided the context for your choices, but the true, eternal battle, the one that truly matters, was always being waged within your own heart. The constant, moment-to-moment choice between love and fear, between compassion and indifference, between actively seeking my light or passively dwelling in the obscuring shadows of limited human understanding and ego. Visions then began to unfold with breathtaking clarity. Illustrating these profound spiritual truths, I saw souls who had lived outwardly simple, even obscure lives of quiet, unassuming service, unrecognized and uncelebrated by the world. Yet they radiated a brilliant, dazzling inner light because their hearts were overflowing with pure love, genuine humility, and selfless compassion. Conversely, I saw others who had held positions of great earthly power, influence, and even high religious authority, who were outwardly respected and revered, yet their spiritual forms appeared dim, constricted, and burdened by the weight of unacknowledged pride, spiritual arrogance, and a profound lack of genuine, heartfelt compassion for their fellow beings. It was a radical, stunning reordering of my entire understanding of worth, value, and true importance. The deeply ingrained values of the world I had known, rank, status, valor in combat, material success, nationalistic fervor, all seemed to fade into utter insignificance when compared to the simple, luminous, eternal truth of a loving, humble, and compassionate heart. He showed me with unequivocal certainty that every single soul was infinitely precious to Him, precious beyond human comprehension, regardless of their nationality, their creed, their race, their social standing, or the side they had fought on in the tragic, ephemeral conflicts of earth. This was a particularly staggering and deeply challenging revelation for me, a career soldier, a man trained and conditioned for years to see the world in stark terms of allies and enemies, of us versus them, the core teaching of loving one's enemy, a concept which had always seemed to me like an impossible, almost naive and impractical ideal in the brutal calculus of warfare, suddenly resonated with a profound, undeniable, spiritual logic. It wasn't about condoning harmful actions or ignoring injustice, he clarified, but about recognizing the shared, inherent spark of divinity within every single being, however deeply obscured or distorted that spark might be by layers of hatred, ignorance, fear, or indoctrination. The life review, I understood then, wasn't a judgment in the punitive human sense of the word. It was far more akin to a divine diagnostic, a loving, honest, and meticulously thorough assessment designed to facilitate profound spiritual growth, healing, and ultimate understanding. The overwhelming regret I felt was not imposed upon me by Him. It arose naturally, spontaneously, from my own newfound piercing clarity, from vividly seeing the chasm between what I had been in my earthly ignorance and what I could have been, had I lived in closer alignment with His infinite love and wisdom. His divine purpose was not to shame or diminish me, but to awaken me, to purify me, to prepare me for a deeper, more complete understanding of the eternal spiritual realities that underpinned all existence. And as this illuminating phase of the life review concluded, I felt stripped bare of all pretense, all ego, all illusion, yet strangely, incredibly hopeful, receptive, and profoundly ready to receive whatever further truths He, in His infinite mercy, wished to impart to my waiting soul. The immensity of the light seemed to deepen, to become even more vibrant, and with it, my capacity for understanding expanded further, as if my very consciousness was being gently stretched to accommodate truths too vast for my earthly mind. The central divine figure, Jesus, began to unveil the intricate spiritual realities that lay behind the often deceptive curtain of the physical world, particularly concerning the hidden nature of human conflict and the subtle, unseen forces that so often manipulate and drive it. It was as if I were being granted a privileged glimpse into the very engine room of human history, shown the invisible currents of thought, emotion, and spiritual energy that shape our collective and individual destinies. He showed me with undeniable clarity how earthly wars, like the devastating one I had just been a part of, were frequently grotesque, externalized reflections of deeper, unresolved spiritual battles raging within human consciousness and in unseen spiritual dimensions. Visions unfolded before me where I witnessed not just soldiers wielding physical weapons, but also insidious spiritual entities of darkness, the very same shadowy forms I had briefly glimpsed when I first left my body, now seen with terrifying clarity in their full, malevolent operation. These beings of shadow and discord appeared to feed voraciously on the raw, negative emotions generated by violence, the fear, the hatred, the despair, the lust for revenge. They whispered insidious suggestions into the hearts and minds of vulnerable individuals, fanning the embers of animosity, twisting perceptions, amplifying grievances, and actively encouraging division and strife at every level of human interaction, from personal disputes to international conflicts. It was a chilling and deeply disturbing revelation to see how easily human beings, often with the best of intentions or driven by legitimate grievances, could become unwitting pawns and instruments in these larger, unseen spiritual struggles, their natural human anger and righteous prejudice skillfully amplified and exploited by these forces beyond their ordinary comprehension. The conflicts you witness and participate in on earth, Elias. His communication was imbued with a profound, divine sorrow that pierced my soul, are almost invariably born from a collective and individual turning away from love, from the divine source of all being. When human hearts are closed to me, when they prioritize ego, fear, greed, or tribal loyalties above universal love and compassion, they become tragically susceptible to the subtle, deceptive whispers of darkness. These forces promise power, vindicate hatred, or offer simplistic solutions to complex problems, but their paths lead only to ever-increasing suffering, deeper separation from me, and further entanglement in cycles of violence and retribution. He then allowed me to feel a fraction of the immense pain this pervasive spiritual blindness and its resultant conflicts caused him. It wasn't an angry, vengeful pain of a slighted deity, but the deep, aching grief of an infinitely loving parent watching their beloved children, in their ignorance and fear, inflict terrible wounds upon themselves and upon each other. His love, I understood with overwhelming certainty, was so vast, so unconditional, that it encompassed all beings, even those who perpetrated the most heinous acts of cruelty. His deepest desire, his constant, unwavering intention, was for all souls to eventually awaken, to repent, and to return to the path of love, harmony, and joyful reconciliation with Him and with each other. This vision of a universally loving, nonpartisan divine was a radical and explosive departure from the often tribal, nationalistic, or sectarian images of a deity who might take sides in human wars, a concept that had perhaps lurked, unexamined, in the recesses of my soldier's mind, providing a subtle justification for my actions. He revealed that true, enduring strength was not to be found in the capacity to dominate, to conquer, or to destroy, but in the infinitely greater courage required to love unconditionally, to forgive 70 times 7, and to actively build bridges of understanding and compassion, even in the face of profound animosity, betrayal, or aggression. He then showed me countless acts of incredible spiritual bravery from across human history, individuals who, in the very midst of the infernos of war and tides of hatred, had consciously chosen compassion over cruelty, who had risked their own lives to save a perceived enemy, who had steadfastly refused to succumb to the seductive, poisonous allure of the cycle of vengeance. These luminous acts of selfless love, often unseen, unrecorded, and uncelebrated by the annals of worldly history, shone like brilliant, defiant stars in the spiritual firmament, actively pushing back the encroaching darkness and holding open a space for grace and healing to enter the world. The very concept of an enemy, so central and fundamental to my entire military life and worldview, was being completely and irrevocably dismantled before my spiritual eyes. He wasn't suggesting a naive, idealistic pacifism that ignored the harsh realities of human aggression or the genuine need for the protection of the innocent in a fallen world. Rather, he was revealing a higher, more encompassing truth, that at the deepest soul level, all beings are profoundly interconnected, integral parts of a single, vast, divine tapestry. Therefore, any violence, any harm inflicted upon another, is ultimately a form of self-harm, a wound upon one's own soul, and a desecration of the divine fabric of unity that lovingly binds all creation together. He showed me how sincere prayers, genuinely offered from a place of pure, selfless love and deep compassion, especially prayers for those considered enemies or those who have caused us harm, created powerful, transformative ripples of light and healing energy in the spiritual realm, significantly strengthening the forces of divine light and peace, and subtly influencing hearts and minds towards reconciliation. It was a profound and urgent call to a different kind of warfare, a spiritual struggle fought not with bullets, bombs, and bloodshed, but with the invincible weapons of unconditional love, radical forgiveness, unwavering faith, and an unshakable commitment to the highest spiritual principles of unity and compassion. This burgeoning understanding was both profoundly devastating and incredibly liberating. Devastating, because it cast the entirety of my military career, and indeed much of human history, with its endless litany of wars and atrocities, in a new, more deeply tragic and spiritually impoverished light. Liberating, because it simultaneously offered a clear, tangible path beyond the seemingly endless, futile cycles of conflict and retribution. A luminous vision of a world where the infinitely creative and restorative forces of divine love could, if embraced, ultimately prevail over all darkness. My previously cherished notions of patriotism, duty, sacrifice, and even justice were being stretched, reevaluated, purified, and profoundly deepened. It wasn't that these concepts were inherently wrong or without value. He helped me understand, but rather that they needed to be rightly ordered, to be subsumed under and informed by a higher, all-encompassing loyalty, an ultimate loyalty to divine love and to the entire, indivisible family of humanity and all creation. The very idea of victory and defeat in earthly terms, of winners and losers in the cruel game of war, seemed utterly hollow, childish, and ultimately meaningless when viewed from this eternal, spiritual perspective. The only true and lasting victory, he showed me, was the victory of love, compassion, and truth in the individual human heart. And correspondingly, the only true and tragic defeat was the soul's surrender to the insidious forces of hatred, fear, division, and illusion. As these profound, life-altering revelations settled ever more deeply within my transformed consciousness, I felt an overwhelming, burning desire to understand my own specific role, my past failings in light of this new knowledge, and what, if anything, I could now possibly do to serve this higher purpose. The weight of it all was immense, almost crushing, yet because I was experiencing it all, while continuously held within His infinitely loving and supportive presence, it was a weight that purified and strengthened rather than diminished or crushed. The dialogue with the central divine figure, Jesus, became more direct, more intensely personal, as I, Elias, the former soldier, struggled to assimilate the sheer vastness and the radical implications of what I was being shown and taught. My mind, still tethered in some vestigial way to its earthly patterns of linear thought and logical reasoning, grappled with the apparent contradictions and the overwhelming scale of the divine plan. Why? The question, raw and elemental, formed in the core of my consciousness not as a challenge to His wisdom or goodness, but as a desperate plea for deeper, more comprehensive understanding. Why? If your love is truly all-powerful, and your desire for our well-being is absolute, is there so much suffering, so much pervasive darkness, so much seemingly senseless cruelty in the world you created? His response was not a simple, easily digestible answer, not a theological formula, but an unfolding of further, deeper truth, conveyed with that same infinite patience and boundless compassion that was His very essence. Elias, my beloved child, love, by its very nature, by its intrinsic divine quality, cannot compel, cannot coerce, cannot violate the sanctity of choice. True love invites, it allows, it respects freedom, the capacity for experiencing and expressing great love, for choosing light and unity, also, by necessity, implies the freedom to choose its opposite, to turn away, to embrace darkness, to create separation. The darkness you perceive and have experienced so painfully in the world is not a co-equal power to my light. It is merely the shadow cast by souls, both human and non-human, who have, in their freedom, turned away from the eternal, life-giving source. It is the inevitable, tragic consequence of free will misused, of ignorance embraced, of fear allowed to dictate action. Yet, even in the deepest, most terrifying shadow, my light is ever present. My call is ever sounding. My love is ever seeking to penetrate, to heal, to restore, and to bring all back to unity. This profound concept of free will, and its staggering, far-reaching consequences, resonated with a new and terrible clarity within my soul. I had seen men make choices on the battlefield, choices for incredible heroism and selfless sacrifice, and choices for shocking cruelty and base self-preservation, often in moments of extreme pressure and existential threat. Now I was seeing that very same principle of choice, of moral agency, magnified to a cosmic spiritual scale, with eternal ramifications. And what of us, the soldiers? I asked, the word soldier now feeling strangely inadequate, almost alien on my spiritual tongue, tinged with the sorrow of my new understanding. Those of us who fight, who are trained to take lives, who participate in the machinery of war, even when we believe, perhaps sincerely, that we are fighting for a just cause, to protect the innocent, to uphold freedom. Where do we stand in this great, divine unfolding of your plan? The heart, Elias. Always the heart is what I see, he communicated with an intensity that conveyed its supreme importance. The outward action, even a terrible one such as the taking of a human life, if committed from a place of perceived dire necessity, in a genuine, albeit perhaps flawed, attempt to protect the innocent from greater harm, is viewed and understood by me differently than an action committed from pure malice, from hatred, from greed, or from the lust for cruelty. Nevertheless, understand this truth. All violence, all shedding of blood, all taking of life, regardless of the perceived justification, carries a significant spiritual weight, inflicts a wound upon the delicate fabric of universal unity, and creates karmic consequences that must eventually be balanced and healed, if not in one lifetime, then in another. The path to healing from such actions, for individuals and for collectives, lies in sincerely acknowledging this spiritual weight, in seeking genuine forgiveness from me and from those harmed, and in actively, diligently striving to transform the very impulses within the human psyche that lead to conflict, the fear, the aggression, the tribalism, the prejudice, into their divine counterparts, courage rooted in love, strength used for protection and service, universal brotherhood, and compassionate understanding. This transformation must begin within oneself, Elias, and then radiate outwards into the world. He then imparted, with a clarity and urgency that seared itself into my very essence, the core of the message he wished for me to understand with every fiber of my being, and which he was now commissioning me, in my own flawed way, to share with a world desperately in need of it. It was a message of radical, all-inclusive, unconditional love, a divine love that transcended all earthly divisions of nation, race, religion, gender, ideology, or any other category that humans use to separate themselves from one another. It was a clarion call for all humanity to awaken from its slumber of spiritual ignorance, to recognize its profound, unbreakable spiritual interconnectedness, to honor and cherish the sacred, divine spark that resides within every single individual, even, and perhaps especially, within those deemed enemies or other. The greatest, most fundamental law of existence, the one upon which all others depend, he emphasized, his divine essence glowing with an even greater, more brilliant intensity that filled all of my awareness, is to love me, the source of all being, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And, flowing inextricably from that, to love your neighbor, every single fellow being, as you love yourself. And understand, Elias, your neighbor is everyone. There are no exceptions in my infinite, impartial love, and therefore, there should be none in yours if you wish to truly walk in my way and be an instrument of my peace. He showed me then, with vivid, heartbreaking clarity, that true, lasting peace on earth would never, could never, be achieved through military might, through political treaties alone, or through economic leverage. These external measures might, at best, create temporary cessations of overt hostility, fragile truces in an ongoing war of hearts. But lasting, genuine peace, he revealed, could only be built upon the unshakable foundation of millions, even billions, of individually transformed human hearts on a global, grassroots upwelling of authentic compassion, radical forgiveness, mutual respect, and a lived understanding of our shared divinity. Tell them, Elias. His divine directive was gentle in its tone, yet unmistakably clear and imbued with an urgent imperative. Tell all who will listen that the path to true, enduring peace, both personal and collective, begins within each individual soul. Tell them to first lay down the insidious weapons of hatred, of judgment, of resentment, of fear, that they carry so unknowingly, so destructively, within their own hearts. Tell them that my love is real, that it is present, that it is more than sufficient to heal all wounds, to bridge all divides, to mend all brokenness, if only they will turn to me with sincerity, open their hearts, and allow my transforming grace and love to flow through them into the world. This message was so breathtakingly simple in its essence, yet so profoundly challenging, so radically countercultural, and so starkly at odds with the ingrained complexities, the cynical realpolitik, and the brutal, often violent realities of the world I had known and participated in. It wasn't a new political ideology or a clever strategic plan for conflict resolution. It was nothing less than a call for a global spiritual revolution, a revolution beginning silently, powerfully, in the sacred, inner sanctum of each individual human heart. He then showed me my own potential role in this grand, divine endeavor, not as a soldier wielding weapons in the earthly sense any longer, but as a humble messenger, a willing conduit for this transformative love, a small, flickering light helping to illuminate the path for others. The thought was simultaneously terrifying in its responsibility and exhilarating in its sacred potential. How could I, Elias Vance, a man of war, a soul still grappling with his own shadows and failings, presume to speak of such divine peace, such universal love? How could my voice, so long accustomed to barking orders in the heat and chaos of battle, ever learn to convey such a gentle, yet infinitely powerful and world-changing truth? His reassurance was immediate, flowing into me like a calming river of light. It is not by your own limited strength, Elias, but by mine flowing through you. Your experiences, even the harshest, most painful ones, have, in their own way, prepared you for this. They have stripped away many illusions. They have broken open your heart, and they have made you receptive to receive and to share this truth. Speak simply what you have seen here, what you have felt in my presence, what you now know with an unshakable certainty in the core of your being. The words will be given to you when they are needed. Trust in me. The sheer, almost unbearable responsibility of it was daunting, yet mingled inextricably with it was an incredible burgeoning sense of true purpose, a purpose far greater, far more meaningful, far more aligned with the deepest longings of my soul than any I had ever known or imagined before. This was not just another mission. It was a sacred, life-altering trust. The central divine figure, Jesus, then tenderly conveyed that my time in this realm of pure, unadulterated light and profound, direct understanding was drawing to a close. An immediate sense of profound, almost unbearable reluctance welled up within my consciousness. Having experienced this sublime state of absolute peace, unconditional love, and perfect clarity, the thought of returning to the broken, chaotic, often brutal world I had left behind, with its pervasive pain, its frustrating limitations, its spiritual blindness, and its relentless demands, was almost more than I could bear. I want to stay. The thought, the desperate plea, formed with an almost physical ache within my consciousness, a silent, passionate yearning to remain forever in his healing, illuminating presence, to never again be separated from this state of grace. His response was filled with an infinitely tender understanding that fully acknowledged the depth of my desire, yet simultaneously affirmed a different, necessary path for me at this juncture of my eternal journey. Elias, my beloved child, your sacred journey in the physical realm, with its unique lessons and opportunities for soul growth, is not yet complete. There is still vital work for you to do there. A crucial message you must now carry back with you. The profound peace and unconditional love you have experienced here are not meant to be hoarded selfishly, but to be generously shared, to become a living beacon of hope and guidance for others who are still lost, stumbling in the spiritual darkness of the world, yearning for the very light you have now witnessed and embraced. He then showed me, not in the detailed panoramic style of the life review, but as a series of gentle, prescient flashes of insight, the potential positive ripples, the unforeseen pathways of grace that my return to earth could initiate. He showed me faces of people I did not yet know in my earthly life, souls who were struggling, searching, despairing, whose lives might be unexpectedly touched, significantly changed, perhaps even spiritually awakened, by the humble, sincere testimony I would bear of his love and truth. He helped me understand that even a single, small light, if carried faithfully and shared courageously, could dispel an astonishing amount of darkness in the world, far more than one might imagine from a limited human perspective. The intense reluctance I had felt at the thought of returning began to slowly transform, first into a hesitant, almost mournful acceptance, and then, gradually, into a burgeoning sense of sacred resolve. The mission he was entrusting to me, I began to realize, was not a burden to be endured, but an incredible honor, a sacred privilege, a direct continuation of service on a far higher, more spiritually significant plane than I had ever conceived possible. You will not be alone in this challenging endeavor, he assured me, his divine love a tangible, empowering force that enveloped and strengthened my entire being. I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. When you speak my truth with sincerity and humility, my spirit will indeed speak through you. The strength you will need for every trial, the wisdom for every decision, the words for every encounter will be provided to you, moment by moment. The path forward will be made clear, one step at a time. Trust in me. Then came the gentle but inexorable pull, a palpable sensation of being drawn back, away from the ineffable heart of the divine light. It wasn't a forceful expulsion or a sudden banishment, but a tender, almost reluctant release, like a loving hand slowly letting go after a long, comforting embrace. The overwhelming brilliance of his immediate presence began to recede, not diminishing in its power or glory, but subtly shifting its mode of manifestation, becoming less of an external, overwhelming phenomenon and more of an internalized, abiding light within the core of my soul. The profound peace, the unconditional love, the unshakable clarity, these remained etched forever into the very fabric of my spiritual DNA, an indelible, eternal imprint that I knew with absolute certainty would never, ever leave me. My last perception in that transcendent realm, as the final veils of earthly consciousness began to descend, was his voice, his knowing, his loving promise echoing like a divine symphony within the deepest chambers of my renewed spirit. Go now in peace, my son, and be an unwavering bearer of my light to a world that so desperately needs it. Remember all that you have learned here. Love without limit. Forgive without hesitation. Serve without expectation of reward. For in so doing, you serve me. The transition back was not a gentle reawakening into earthly life. It was a violent, shocking, jarring collision with the dense, painful reality of physicality. One moment I was bathed in ineffable, transcendent light and immersed in unconditional love. The next, an explosion of agonizing, overwhelming sensation. My chest felt as if it were being simultaneously crushed by an immense weight and ripped apart from within. A desperate, rasping gasp, the first breath of a painful rebirth, tore through my throat, raw and ragged. The world around me erupted in a bewildering cacophony of harsh, metallic sounds, urgent, strained shouts, and a blinding, chaotic, flickering light. The frantic, desperate reality of a field resuscitation attempt under duress. I could hear those shouts, muffled at first, then growing clearer, voices laced with a mixture of intense concentration and dawning, almost disbelieving hope. "We've got a pulse. He's breathing. Get that line in now." Strong, urgent hands were on me, probing, pressing. A gritty oxygen mask was clamped roughly over my face, the smell of antiseptic, sweat, and fresh blood filling my nostrils with a nauseating familiarity. My body was a symphony of excruciating pain. My chest, where the fatal blow had landed, felt like a molten inferno. My wounded leg throbbed with a relentless, fiery agony. Every nerve ending in my battered form seemed to be screaming in raw, unadulterated protest. It was a brutal, shocking re-entry into a world I had, for a timeless, blessed interval, completely transcended. Consciousness flickered precariously, a fragile, sputtering flame buffeted by a storm of pain and sensory overload. Through vision that swam and blurred, I saw indistinct faces hovering above me, medics, their expressions a tense mask of intense professional focus, tinged with a dawning astonishment that mirrored my own internal shock. I tried to speak, to articulate the incredible, world-shattering experience I had just undergone, to tell them what I had seen, where I had been, the message I carried, but only a choked, inarticulate groan managed to escape my lips. The contrast was staggering, almost unbearable, capable of shattering a lesser resolve. From the boundless, indescribable peace and infinite love of his divine presence, I had been hurled back into this raw, brutal reality of a broken, tormented body and the unrelenting, savage chaos of war. Yet beneath the overwhelming waves of physical pain, beneath the disorienting fog of confusion, the indelible imprint of that other, higher realm remained. a deep, quiet, unshakable certainty, an unassailable knowing. I was back, and I had a message, a sacred mission from the very heart of existence. The journey from the blood-soaked battlefield to the makeshift field hospital, and then, after initial stabilization, by medevac helicopter to a larger, more sophisticated medical facility, was a protracted blur of searing pain, medication-induced haziness, and fragmented, luminous memories of the light. My body was undeniably broken, a shattered vessel, but my spirit, though still reeling from the profound whiplash of transitioning between such vastly different realms of existence, felt strangely whole, renewed, imbued with a serene and unshakable purpose that transcended my immediate physical suffering. The attending doctors, a team of skilled and dedicated professionals, repeatedly called my survival a miracle, shaking their heads in disbelief. I had been clinically dead for several minutes. They informed me later, my injuries deemed catastrophic and unsurvivable by all normal medical standards. They spoke with hushed reverence of lucky shrapnel trajectories that had missed vital organs by millimeters, of the remarkably rapid and effective medical intervention on the field, of the unexpected resilience of the human body, pushed beyond its known limits. I listened to their explanations, nodded politely, but I knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest core of my being, that the true explanation for my return lay far beyond the grasp of medical science. Rooted in a divine mercy and a sacred purpose I was only just beginning to comprehend. My wife, Sarah, her beautiful face a heart-wrenching mask of profound anguish, sleepless exhaustion, and tearful, overwhelming relief, was flown in as soon as I was stable enough for visitors. Holding her hand, feeling its trembling warmth, seeing the unconditional love and the lingering fear in her weary eyes, powerfully grounded me in the precious reality of the earthly life I had been so unexpectedly, so miraculously given back. But the question loomed, immense and daunting. How could I ever begin to explain to her, or to anyone else for that matter, what had truly happened to me? How could I possibly articulate an experience so profound, so sacred, so utterly beyond the scope of ordinary human language and comprehension? The initial days of recovery were an intense, multifaceted struggle, not just with the demanding process of physical healing from grievous wounds, but also with the immense, almost overwhelming, spiritual and psychological task of integrating the NDE, with all its paradigm-shattering revelations, into my conscious understanding and my ongoing earthly existence. The memories of that other realm were incredibly vivid, intensely luminous, almost more real than the sterile hospital room around me. Yet trying to describe them in mere words felt like a futile, almost profane attempt to capture an infinite ocean of sunlight in a tiny, fragile jar. The world around me, the hushed efficiency of the hospital, the concerned faces of nurses and doctors, even the profound love emanating from my anxious family, seemed strangely muted, almost two-dimensional, lacking the vibrant, multi-dimensional reality, the sheer aliveness I had so recently witnessed and been a part of. When I felt a modicum of strength return, when the fog of painkillers lifted slightly, I tried to speak about it, first and foremost to Sarah, my rock, my confidant. I fumbled for words, my voice hoarse and thick with unshed tears and overwhelming emotion, recounting the terrifying out-of-body experience, the menacing darkness, the sudden, glorious advent of the overwhelming light, the indescribable encounter with him, with Jesus, the panoramic, soul-searching life review, and the profound, world-altering revelations about the true nature of love, the spiritual underpinnings of conflict, and the sacred interconnectedness of all life. She listened with rapt, unwavering attention, her hand never leaving mine, her expression a complex tapestry of bewilderment, deep concern, and a dawning, palpable sense of awe. She didn't dismiss my words as delusion or trauma-induced hallucination. She knew me too well, knew I wasn't prone to flights of fantasy or religious hysteria. She saw the profound, undeniable change in my eyes, in the very essence of my demeanor. "Elias," she whispered. When I finally fell silent, her voice trembling slightly. Whatever happened to you out there? It was real, wasn't it? I can see it in you. Her quiet, unwavering acceptance was a healing balm to my soul, a crucial, validating first step on a long and uncertain journey. Sharing my experience with others, especially my military comrades who came to visit, proved to be far more challenging. These were hardened men, pragmatic, grounded in the stark, unforgiving realities of life and death on the battlefield. An NDE, a personal encounter with a divine figure, the idea of a spiritual message, it was simply too far outside their established frame of reference. They listened, most of them, with a sort of respectful, if uncomfortable, skepticism. They attributed my experience to the well-documented effects of severe trauma, to lack of oxygen to the brain during clinical death, to the mind's powerful capacity to play tricks on itself under extreme duress. I didn't argue with them, I couldn't. I understood their perspective all too well. I had, until very recently, shared it myself. But their gentle, well-intentioned disbelief underscored the immense difficulty of the mission he had apparently given me. How could I effectively convey a truth so profound that it arguably had to be directly experienced to be fully, truly understood and embraced? The military chaplains I spoke with were somewhat more receptive, trained as they were to consider matters of faith and the spirit. Yet, even they seemed to struggle to fit my intensely personal, powerfully transformative experience into the neat, established categories of conventional theological understanding. My encounter was too direct, too personal, too overwhelming in its implications. My own internal conflict was immense, a seismic shift in the tectonic plates of my identity. My lifelong persona, as Sergeant Elias Vance, career soldier, leader of men, a man of action and pragmatic faith, was now being fundamentally challenged, reshaped by this profound, undeniable spiritual awakening. The stark, comforting simplicities of duty, honor, country, and mission were now overlaid, complicated, and ultimately enriched by far more complex, universal truths about divine love, radical forgiveness, and the sacred, indivisible unity of all souls. How could I possibly reconcile the man of war I had been with the nascent messenger of divine peace I was now called to become? The once strong desire to return to the battlefield, to rejoin my unit, to continue the fight, had completely faded. Not out of cowardice or a loss of courage, but out of a profound, irreversible shift in perspective. The thought of willingly taking another human life, even in the name of duty or a cause I had once believed in implicitly, now felt utterly abhorrent, a deep violation of the sacred truths I had been shown. The mission he had entrusted to me was of an entirely different order, a spiritual campaign for hearts and minds, not for territory or political dominance. My physical recovery was slow, painful, arduous. But with each passing day, as my broken body painstakingly mended, my spiritual resolve, my sense of divine purpose, strengthened and clarified. I replayed his words, his loving presence, his illuminating revelations, over and over in the sanctuary of my mind, seeking to understand their deepest meaning, to prepare myself spiritually and emotionally for the daunting task that lay ahead. The world, when I was finally able to engage with it again, seemed different, or rather, I saw it with entirely new eyes. I perceived the hidden pain and pervasive fear in people's eyes more clearly than ever before, but I also saw, with equal clarity, their immense, often untapped potential for love, their deep, unconscious yearning for genuine connection with each other and with the divine. The message he had given me, the urgent, vital message about laying down the insidious weapons of the heart, about consciously choosing love over fear, compassion over judgment, and about recognizing our shared, inherent divinity, burned within me like a holy, inextinguishable fire. I knew, with an unshakable conviction that transcended all doubt, that my life could not and would not ever go back to what it had been. I had journeyed to the very edge of eternity and had been graciously permitted to return. not just with my physical life unexpectedly restored, but with a sacred, life-altering purpose. The ongoing struggle was no longer primarily about my own physical survival or personal well-being, but about how to faithfully, effectively, and courageously bear the precious, transformative light I had been so mercifully shown. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, fraught with potential disbelief, misunderstanding, and even ridicule, but I was not afraid. I had his unequivocal promise, "I will be with you," and that, I knew, was more than enough. My physical recovery progressed, slowly but steadily, but the internal, spiritual transformation was far more rapid and profound. The man who had been Sergeant Elias Vance, a career soldier defined by discipline, duty, and the stark realities of combat, was inexorably, almost daily, becoming someone new, someone whose identity was no longer forged in the crucible of war, but in the luminous, unconditional love of the divine. The decision to formally leave the military, to hang up my uniform for good, was not taken lightly. It had been my entire adult life, my primary source of identity, the very scaffolding upon which my sense of self and purpose had been constructed for 2 long decades. But the profound, irreconcilable dissonance between the inherent nature of armed conflict, its violence, its dehumanization, its perpetuation of cycles of retribution, and the core message of unconditional love, universal forgiveness, and radical peace that I had received directly from Jesus, was too stark, too fundamental to ignore or rationalize away. How could I, in good conscience, continue to participate in and lead others within a system that, however necessary it might seem from a purely earthly, pragmatic perspective, was so often a tragic external manifestation of the very fear, hatred, and spiritual disconnection he had so clearly shown me? It was a deeply painful and complex process, filled with difficult conversations with superiors who, understandably, couldn't fully grasp the depth of my transformation, and with loyal comrades who, in some instances, felt a sense of betrayal, as if I were abandoning them and the code we had lived by. But Sarah, my beloved wife, stood by me with unwavering support and quiet strength, her intuitive understanding a constant source of comfort. She had witnessed the undeniable change in me, the deep, serene, unshakable peace that now resided where once there had been a soldier's restless vigilance and underlying tension. She believed in my experience, and she believed in my new, divinely ordained path. My new mission, the one he had given me in that realm of light, began tentatively, informally, almost organically. I started by simply sharing my story, my testimony, with small, intimate groups, with anyone who exhibited a genuine willingness to listen with an open heart and mind. Veterans support groups where pain and searching were palpable, church gatherings hungry for authentic spiritual experience, even just curious individuals I encountered in the course of my daily life. I spoke not as a preacher, for I had no theological training, nor as a polished orator, for I was a man of action more than words, but simply, humbly, as a witness. A man who had journeyed to the brink of eternity and had been brought back with a message not of his own making. I recounted my NDE in as much detail as I could muster, trying to convey the ineffable, the terrifying darkness, the sudden, glorious advent of the light, the overwhelming, transformative love of the central divine figure, Jesus, the soul-searching life review with its painful and liberating revelations, and the profound insights he had shared about the spiritual nature of existence, the unseen forces behind earthly conflict, and the absolute, unyielding imperative of love as the guiding principle of all life. I spoke with a newfound conviction that surprised even myself of the urgent need for humanity to lay down the insidious weapons of hatred, resentment, prejudice, and judgment that we carry so carelessly, so destructively, within our own hearts, long before we ever pick up a physical weapon. The reactions to my testimony were, as he had forewarned, varied and often unpredictable. Some listeners were profoundly moved, tears streaming down their faces, their souls visibly touched, recognizing in my words a deep, unspoken truth that resonated with their own innermost spiritual yearnings and questions. They asked earnest, searching questions, shared their own personal struggles, their own often frustrated search for meaning and authentic connection with the divine. For these individuals, my story seemed to serve as a confirmation, a tangible beacon of hope in a world often shrouded in doubt and despair. Others, predictably, remained deeply skeptical, their minds unable or unwilling to stretch beyond the conventional, materialistic worldview. They politely attributed my experience to the known and documented psychological and physiological effects of extreme trauma, anoxia, and the mind's complex defense mechanisms under duress. I met their skepticism not with defensiveness or argument, for I knew that intellectual debate could not impart the kind of heart knowledge I had received, but with the same gentle patience and understanding that he had so generously shown me. I couldn't force belief. I could only offer my testimony as a seed, plant it with love, and trust that the inherent truth within the message would, in its own time, find its own way to the fertile ground of receptive hearts. Some of the most impactful and healing conversations I had were with other veterans, men and women who, like me, had seen the unvarnished face of war, who carried its deep, often invisible scars upon their souls. They understood the darkness, the moral ambiguities, the spiritual emptiness that prolonged exposure to conflict could breed in even the strongest individuals. For some of these wounded warriors, my message, my story of encountering divine love and forgiveness even after a life of soldiering, offered a new, unexpected framework for understanding their own traumatic experiences, a potential path towards profound healing, genuine reconciliation, not just with others they may have harmed, but, crucially, within themselves. I certainly didn't have all the answers, nor did I pretend to. My own understanding of the vast spiritual truths I had glimpsed was still evolving, deepening with each passing day, with each new opportunity to reflect and to share. But I held fast, with an unshakable grip, to the luminous core of his message. Love is the ultimate reality, the most powerful, creative, and healing force in the entire universe. Forgiveness, radical and unconditional, is essential, for ourselves as much as for others, to break the chains of past pain and resentment. True, lasting peace, the peace that surpasses all human understanding, begins not in grand political gestures, but silently, sacredly, within the transformed landscape of the individual human heart. Every single soul, without exception, is infinitely precious, a beloved child of the divine, interconnected in a vast, intricate web of spiritual kinship. I discovered that the most powerful and effective way to convey this transformative message was not through eloquent rhetoric or sophisticated theological argument, but by striving, however imperfectly, to embody the very love, peace, and compassion I had so overwhelmingly experienced in his presence. It was in genuinely listening to others with an open, non-judgmental heart, in speaking my truth with honesty, humility, and vulnerability, in consciously making the effort to see and honor the divine spark within everyone I met, even and especially those who disagreed with me, misunderstood me, or treated me with hostility or contempt. My life was no longer primarily about fighting an external enemy. It was now dedicated to contributing in whatever small, humble way I could to the desperately needed growth of love, wisdom, and understanding in a fractured and suffering world. The battlefield had shifted from the dusty, blood-soaked plains of foreign lands to the often turbulent, challenging, yet ultimately sacred landscape of the human heart. The mission was far more difficult, far more nuanced, yet infinitely more rewarding and aligned with my deepest, truest self. As I continue this unexpected, divinely appointed journey, I often recall his comforting, empowering words, "Speak what you have seen, what you have felt, what you now know. The words will be given to you when they are needed, and they are consistently, miraculously. Each time, I summoned the courage to share my story, to bear witness to the truth he revealed. I feel his unmistakable presence, a quiet, inner strength, a gentle, loving guidance, a confirmation that I am not alone in this sacred endeavor. The fear of ridicule, of rejection, of misunderstanding has largely faded, replaced by an urgent, burning desire to share the boundless hope, the profound healing, and the transformative love I was so freely, so undeservedly given. My life, in its entirety, is now a testament to the undeniable fact that profound, radical transformation is possible for anyone, that even from the deepest, darkest depths of violence, despair, and spiritual ignorance, the eternal, invincible light can and will emerge. It is a testament that divine love is, indeed, stronger than death, stronger than hatred, stronger than all the forces of darkness combined. And to you, who are listening to this story now, perhaps you too are searching for something more. Perhaps you carry your own hidden wounds, your own unanswered questions, your own deep longings for meaning and connection. His message of love, of hope, of healing is for you as well, right here, right now. Know this: you are loved unconditionally, infinitely, just as you are. You are invited to seek the eternal light that resides within the sacred space of your own heart. You are empowered to choose love over fear, compassion over judgment, forgiveness over bitterness, unity over separation. The divine power to change your own life, and by extension, to contribute to the healing of the world, resides within each and every one of us. It begins with a single, conscious choice, a courageous turning of the heart towards the divine source. My journey has taught me, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that authentic faith is not an escape from the complexities and challenges of the world, but rather a divine means to engage with it more deeply, more lovingly, more effectively. It is not about blind adherence to rigid dogma or empty ritual, but about cultivating a living, breathing, intimate relationship with the divine. I was once a soldier, meticulously trained for the art of war. But he, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, has called me, and is calling all of us, to become soldiers of peace, spiritual warriors armed not with weapons of destruction, but with the invincible power of a transformed heart, a compelling story, a message of eternal hope, and a living testament to the enduring, all-conquering power of divine love. And that, I now know, is a sacred mission I will joyfully, faithfully serve for all the rest of my days and into eternity.